Okay, folks, I'm back. It's been a very short day between my last video, but I got a number of books in a few over the last month or so, and I wanted to share a few of those with you. Ones I got on some sales and some that I did not. But a few that are just interesting that I would share in part of the new editions or new arrivals series that I have kind of going on for the last couple months here. But I've been working on, you can see down there, my collection of Dieter Bonhoeffer's collected works that have been published in German for a long time, but published in English much more recently, and then a brand new edition here by Fortress Press. And I filled out the remaining volumes as of yesterday, so I wanted to share that with you. Two volumes. Finally got the two of the last three that I've been looking for that went on sale of Bonhoeffer's works, and this one is Theological Education Underground. So this is toward the very end of his Finkenwald experiment in the Confessing Church in the seminary, and after it closed. And this has all of his kind of fragmental writings that were letters in some sense. Also has a number of his, really has all of his sermons. So you can either buy the sermons individually right there, or you can get this volume that has all of them in there as well. And these are going to be some letters that are not in the Letters and Papers from Prison, but also many that are, I believe. But there's also fragments as well throughout, and fragmentary sermons and notes for his teachings and things like that that were kind of overlapping with his time in Finkenwald. So it's really awesome what's kept inside here for our perusal and investigation. It's quite enthralling, some of the things that Bonhoeffer wrote. So he has a collection of essays, lectures, and exercises. He's got all the sermons and meditations in here, and many of his letters, both that he sent and both that he received. Again, some of that's in Letters and Papers from Prison. Some of that is, all the sermons are collected into two volumes, but you can get it all in one volume here for a cheaper price if you'd like. So that's volume 15. And really helpful and very cheap. I think I got it for like $15. Is the final volume, which is the index of all the materials of the collected work. So all you got to do, instead of wondering where it is, go to the index and look up the biography name, the work that he cites, or the person, or the scripture text, and it'll cite what volume and what page right there for you. So it's very helpful. So volume 17, the indexes and supplementary materials for the Bonhoeffer collected works. All 17 volumes, finally finished that after many years of slow purchasing, and it's all together, so that's fantastic. I also got a number of books. These are not all of them because I don't want to take too much time, but a number of books that I got that are really helpful and interesting, from Banner of Truth and Reformation Heritage and Soli Deo Gloria and many others, Westminster Seminary Press and many others recently that are helpful that I thought I would share with you. First is a one big volume of sermons by Benjamin Morgan Palmer, who was the president theologian down at New Orleans Baptist Seminary for a long time, was a pastor in New Orleans for a long time. So sermons by Benjamin Morgan Palmer, all first and second volume combined, and all of his sermons are right there. So quite the treasure of many things that you can review and consider for sermons. I think I got it for $20, so I mean pretty cheap for what it is, and it reads pretty flat and pretty well. So helpful if you're wanting to know kind of one of the preeminent preachers in the South back in the 19th century, and has a lot in there to glean from. A couple other things that are of interest here is the preaching of Jonathan Edwards, and this is a Banner of Truth book, the preaching of Jonathan Edwards, and this is like a tome of sorts by John Carrick, who's written another book called The Imperative Preaching with Banner. Banner produced that a number of years ago, I think back in the 90s, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was more recent, but he produces this tome on basically the preaching of Edwards in the sense of the man, the style, the approach of preaching these things, and it's really fascinating if you are into homiletics or you preach yourself. Otherwise, I don't know if there's a whole lot of use for it unless you're just inquisitive about it. But there's a whole lot of use there for someone who like me who preaches and also appreciates, of course, the Puritan period and afterwards, which he was certainly a kind of in the style of Puritans, but certainly not in the time of Puritans. He was an American revivalist in many ways, but also an American evangelical. And so there's a lot to learn from Edwards. But a lot of times his actual preaching is not studied a whole lot. More of what he wrote and more of his philosophy and his theology. But John Carrick has written a number of volumes now on Jonathan Edwards. So really interesting. And then two books I got on that's kind of written against antinomianism. And of course, antinomianism is essentially those two, the prefixes anti, against, nomos, law. So anti-law, basically Christians who believe that the law is either done away with, that there's a lot of people in that camp, or the more dangerous, even more dangerous kind, those who resist and believe the law is not of any use in the sense of the Christian life whatsoever, and would actually downplay it as some kind of second-tier revelation of some kind. And there's all sorts of people that have this antinomian slant or leaning today, and so it's very similar today in many ways. It's not as probably promoted quite as clearly, but it's certainly taught maybe more ignorantly is what I would probably say. But there's two books I got on this that are really going to be helpful for me as I study. One's more of an academic book. The other is more of a collection of sermons on the same subject. But the first is Studies from the Westminster Assembly, and a dissertation done by Whitney Gamble called Christ and the Law, Antinomianism at the Westminster Assembly. So not a long book. It's a dissertation. It's not meant to be as long, but it is quite interesting about the varying perspectives on the law of Christ and the law of the Old Testament and their relationship in the application to the believer's life among the Westminster divines. About 120 plus divines got together and did that work, and there was a variety of perspectives, and you can check out what they came to the conclusion of in chapter 19 of the Westminster Confession of Faith, and very strong on the moral law of God. So this is kind of a behind the scenes look at their fight against antinomianism during that assembly, which is really interesting. This other book is a collection by Nicholas Clagett on his sermons against the abuses of grace. And this will, okay, I'll just say it just straightly. It's a little heavy-handed, I'd probably say. But there's a lot to glean from it in the sense of knowing that, like I said, more militant antinomianism probably back in the time than we probably have in the time. There's a little more ignorance, I would probably say, about it today. But the danger is nonetheless there. And so this is very, very helpful in the sense of it's always fighting against, I think, that tendency to put off God's law and to treat grace as if it's just this inner spiritual reality and there's no clarity of what God's obedience is requiring, meaning the Ten Commandments, right? So really enjoy his work here. Now, this is what Clagett says on page 86. It says, the kingdom of God does not stand in word, but power. This is so good. Its real subjects are as well diligent doers as good speakers. They lay more stress on hearts and lives than lips. That's classic kind of anti-hypocrisy language there. They would rather be than seem to be penitents, rather run in the way of the commandments than walk to them. A groundless entitling to Christ, Lord, Lord, will no faithful subjects of Christ say at the great day. So why should they now? The kingdom of God is righteousness, not only imputed, this is so good, not only imputed, but inherent. Not only of justification, but sanctification. Whew. In the sphere and kingdom of grace, all saved professors have holy hearts and good lives. Whew. Satan's subjects, though they take Christ's name in baptism, here it is, and use the mark of his government, yet never set one foot in God's kingdom. Whoa! So, one, all that's true, but quite pointed in how it gets after hypocrisy. And again, this is the challenge of ministry. The challenge of ministry is that you must be prophetic in how you challenge things like this from time to time. But at times, it must become kind of a focus. if the church that you pastor in or minister to has basically put on an hypocrisy, or is in some ways not practicing in any way what they preach or whatnot. So the amount that you apply this to practical ministry just depends on the situation of the church. But in that day, this was a major issue where everyone had to go to church. It was kind of a state law, see? And because of that, many people going to church would profess Christ, obviously, because they went, but they didn't possess Christ. And so a common issue in that day, one of the highest issues in that day was an issue of false profession and hypocrisy. So, and then 20th century writers here, for the last group here, that are kind of well-known, very established and very respected Presbyterians. The first is that of Cornelius Van Til, and there are 3 books I bought of his. One that just came out, I believe, this past year, if I remember. So this was first published in 1969. This is a brand new republished version of that with some further editing in 2023, and this is edited by Scott Oliphant, and this is by Van Til, but they kind of reorganized it and republished it. It is called A Christian Theory of Knowledge. So this has been put together by Westminster Seminary Press. It's edited by Oliphant, who's a kind of a Van Til scholar, one of a few that are really regarded today in that area, and kind of got a really kind of cool picture of Van Til in the study there. So this is pretty heady stuff. This is this is really challenging stuff, but the way this stuff gets at, I think the idea of knowledge and prolegomena and epistemology, these things are important to the believer, but especially to the Christian teacher and pastor, because the way we understand knowledge as Christians is very crucial as compared to secularism, humanism, Enlightenment-based theories of knowledge. And then he's got another book that's kind of more of a rebuttal of Van Til, and it's a back and forth, kind of a critical assessment of Van Til. So for those that are really into Van Tilian kind of work, it's called Jerusalem and Athens, and of course it's by I think it's by Geheen. Yes, Geheen on here, and the book is essentially a collection of scholars writing back and forth with Van Til. So I think it's just edited by Geheen, but it's not written by him. But it's kind of the who's who of the Reformed world at the time, back in the 70s, and I believe it was also released in 1980. So it was like during a kind of a thunderstorm of activity, back and forth with Van Til. So there are many essays by all sorts of folks, and he responds to most of them, interestingly enough, which is kind of awesome. Very unique volume here. So some, of course, pro Van Til, some con, against Van Til. So Jerusalem and Athens there. And lastly, the nerd in me loves Christian education, and he has a number of essays in this short little volume by, I think it was by Westminster Press, that he put out on Christian education and the importance of Christian education as opposed to secular education. So really good, helpful collection of essays here, where he speaks to the importance of Christ in the Christian school and Christian education, again, as opposed to, the fight in culture, of course, secular education, and also he's speaking to Christian scholarship, which is, pretty far removed from most of us, but important to read his thoughts on. And lastly, pretty important volume that came out, again, by Westminster Seminary Press, I finally had the money to get, and it is a systematic introduction to the Christian and Reformed faith. So it's kind of Christian faith, Reformed theology blended together, but it's not as much of a kind of a systematic in the sense of a traditional systematic. It's more of a systematic collection of lectures that J. Gresham Machen did back in I think it was the 20s and right before he died in 36. So I think it's like 20s and 30s that he released a lot of these on the radio. He was just teaching Reformed theology and the Christian faith, and they're written down here in this lecture series of one book called Things Unseen, and it came out last year, I believe. But essentially, it's a who's who have said, get this book. And I haven't gone through a whole lot of it yet, just got it a couple weeks ago. But just reading through the subject matter, one, it's important to see how it's an introduction, which is great. But secondly, it's also an introduction to the Reformed faith at the same time. So blending in good Reformed theology with the traditional Christian faith themes as well. So Things Unseen by J. Gresham Machen. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I hope that will give you some insight on some things that you might add to your library as you find interest maybe with Bonhoeffer or maybe with different Puritan studies or sermons that you'd like to refer to or check with, or perhaps Van Til and J. Gresham Machen if you are someone who wants to know what American Presbyterians at the beginning of the 20th century, in middle of the 20th century, were really espousing, and very important heavyweight theologians of our tradition, the Presbyterian tradition. So until next time, signing off.